"Dad, we already canceled it. You don't need to go to Florida." That's what my daughter said when I walked into the kitchen holding my boarding pass like it was evidence of a crime. No explanation. No apology. Just that flat, certain voice she uses when she's already decided something and expects me to fall in line. I stood there in my own hallway, the one I refinished myself the summer after my wife passed, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not heartbreak, something older, quieter, and far more dangerous. I said, "You canceled my flight." She didn't look up from her phone. "You've been tired lately. Ray and I talked about it. It's not the right time." I set the boarding pass down on the counter. I didn't raise my voice. I've never been a man who raises his voice. I just said, "I see," and walked back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. My wife would have laughed. Not cruelly. Beverly never had a cruel bone in her, but the way she laughed when something was too absurd to process any other way. She'd have sat beside me and said, "Harold, when did you become a houseplant?" And I would have laughed too. But Beverly has been gone 4 years now, and the house has been quieter than I ever knew a house could be. And somewhere in that quiet, I stopped noticing how small my world had gotten. I'm 73 years old. I ran a plumbing supply business for 31 years. I employed 14 people at our peak. I coached Little League, served on the school board for 2 terms, and drove Beverly to every single chemotherapy appointment without missing one, even when the drives were 3 hours round trip, and I had a knee that needed replacing. I am not a man who needs to be managed. But somehow, over the past 2 years, that's exactly what I'd become. It started small, the way these things always do. My daughter and her husband moved in temporarily after the housing market made buying impossible for them. That was 26 months ago. Temporary, it turned out, was a word with no expiration date. At first, I was glad for the company. The house echoed after Beverly died, and having voices in the rooms again felt like something. But gradually, without my noticing, the temperature in my own home started being set by someone else. My daughter began handling my mail. "Just to help," she said. Then my medication schedule. Then my grocery list. Then my calendar. She did it the way water does things slowly, without drama, until one day you look up and the whole landscape has changed. My son-in-law was subtler about it. He'd say things like, "Harold, have you thought about what happens if you have a fall?" Or, "A man your age really shouldn't be driving after dark." He said it with the concerned face of someone who means well, and the eyes of someone calculating square footage. I had thought about what would happen if I had a fall. I thought about it the same way any man my age does, quietly, in the private hours before sunrise, alongside thoughts of Beverly and whether I'd recognize her right away when the time came. But I didn't need Ray reminding me of my own mortality over dinner with the tone he'd use for a mildly slow employee. They'd brought up the house twice, both times framed as practicality. My daughter sat at the kitchen table where Beverly and I had signed the original mortgage papers and said, "Dad, a house this size is a lot to maintain." The second time, my son-in-law mentioned a friend of his who flipped properties and got well above market value for houses in this neighborhood. I nodded both times. I have always been too polite for my own good. Beverly used to say that too. I pulled out my phone that night and looked up the flight to Tampa. My old friend from the Army, a man I've known since we were both 22 and terrified and pretending otherwise, lives outside Street Pete now. We'd been talking about getting together for 2 years. I'd finally booked the ticket. 3 days. A hotel on the water. 2 old men reliving stories that had gotten better with age. The ticket wasn't cheap, but I'd paid for it with my own money, from my own account, on my own computer, and my daughter had canceled it. Without asking, without mentioning she was going to, she'd used my credit card number, the one she had because she helped manage things, and she had simply undone a decision I made as though my decisions were rough drafts that required her approval. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there listening to the house breathe and thought about the last time I'd done something purely because I wanted to. I couldn't remember. That frightened me more than anything else. The next morning I waited until my daughter had left for work and my son-in-law had driven off to wherever he went during the day. Then I got dressed, put on the blue Oxford Beverly always liked, and drove myself to the bank. Paulette has worked that branch for years. She knows me by name. Knew Beverly, too. She greeted me the way people greet someone they're genuinely glad to see, which already felt different from what I'd grown accustomed to at home. I told her I needed to review the authorized users on my accounts. She pulled everything up and walked me through it. My daughter's name appeared in 3 places. She had access to my checking, could see my savings balance, and was listed as an emergency contact with viewing permissions. All of it had been added over the past 18 months. I asked Paulette to remove every authorization but mine. She looked at me carefully, not with suspicion but with the kind of care a good person brings to a moment they sense is important. "Are you sure, Mr. Watkins?" she asked. "We have some transfers that come out regularly." "I know about the transfers," I said. "Please stop them all." She nodded and got to work without another word. When it was done, she asked if I wanted a new PIN. I said yes. I walked out of there with the receipt folded in my jacket pocket and the strange, specific feeling of a door clicking shut, not on something precious, but on something that had no business being open in the first place. I drove from the bank to a diner 3 miles from my house, a place I hadn't been to in probably 2 years because it was out of the way and my daughter preferred I eat closer to home. I ordered the biscuits and gravy, black coffee, and a slice of pie I didn't need but absolutely wanted. I sat by the window and ate slowly, watching people come and go, and I thought about the flight I needed to rebook. The phone rang on the way home. It was my daughter. I let it ring. It rang twice more before I pulled into the driveway. I sat in the car for a moment in the quiet, the engine ticking as it cooled. My wife and I had sat in this same driveway 100 times after coming home from somewhere good. A dinner, a concert, one of my granddaughter's recitals not wanting to go in yet, just staying in the warmth of the car and each other. I missed that more than I could put into words. Inside, I changed into my work clothes and went down to the basement. I have a woodworking shop there. Small, nothing fancy, just a workbench and tools I've collected over 40 years. I hadn't been down there in months. My daughter had called it a liability after she found me carrying a piece of oak up the stairs last spring. I ran my hand along the workbench, the familiar grain of it, and felt something come back to me like a name you couldn't quite recall suddenly landing on your tongue. I was sanding a piece of walnut, no project in mind, just sanding, just the meditative act of bringing out the grain when I heard footsteps on the stairs. My daughter stood in the doorway looking like someone who'd been braced for an argument and found the wrong room. "Dad, you didn't answer my calls." "I know," I said. "I kept sanding. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. Where did you go?" "Out," I said. "To the bank and to lunch." A pause. "The bank called Ray." I looked up then. "The bank doesn't have Ray's number anymore." She stared at me. For a moment, her face did something complicated that I didn't have the energy to decode. Then she said, "What is going on with you?" I set down the sandpaper. I looked at my daughter, my only child, who has her mother's coloring and her grandfather's stubbornness, and I said, as calmly as I could manage, "You canceled my flight without asking me. Because you've been exhausted. That was my decision to make." "Dad, that was my decision," I said again. "My money, my plans, my friend. And you canceled it, like you were rescheduling a dentist appointment." She crossed her arms. "I was trying to protect you. From what? From going to see a man I've known for 50 years? From spending 3 days in Florida being a person instead of a fixture in my own house?" Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Which part isn't fair? The part where I paid for a trip and you canceled it? Or the part where you and Ray have been making decisions about my life like I signed something I don't remember signing?" She didn't answer. She stood there looking at the floor, and I could see the shape of what she wanted to say, something about worry, about practicality, about the fall I might have or the road I might get lost on, and I waited for it. But she didn't say it. She just turned and went back up the stairs. The door to the basement clicked shut. I stood in the shop a while longer. The walnut piece in my hands was starting to look like the beginning of something. I wasn't sure what yet, but I'd figure it out. That night I called my attorney. Frank Beasley has handled my legal affairs for 15 years. He's methodical, unhurried, and completely unimpressed by other people's emotions, which makes him excellent at his job. I told him I wanted to review my living trust. Any specific concerns? He asked. I want to make sure the house is locked, I said. And I want to revisit the beneficiaries. Can you come in Thursday at 10? I said I could. When I arrived at his office, Frank was already at his desk with my file open, a legal pad, and 2 cups of coffee. He listened the way good listeners do, without filling the silence, without nodding too eagerly, without performing concern. He just heard me. When I finished, he said, "The current trust names your daughter as primary beneficiary with full control of the property upon your death. The accounts show her as a co-authorized user, though that's already changed, I see. I handled that yesterday." He nodded. "Here's what I can do. Life estate designation keeps you in full control while you're alive. No one can touch the property, sell it, mortgage it, or make decisions about it without your written consent. Upon your death, the property transfers according to the trust as you've revised it. I want to change the beneficiary," I said. "I have a grandson. My daughter's son, 17, starts college in 2 years. I'd like him to have the house." Frank made a note. "Not your daughter. My daughter can do things for herself," I said. "My grandson can't yet. And he's the only one in that family who talks to me like I'm a person." That was true. My grandson had the habit, unusual in someone his age, of asking questions and then actually listening to the answers. He'd sit with me at the workbench sometimes after school and ask about the army, about his grandmother, about what it was like to start a business from nothing. He didn't want anything from me except the conversation itself. I hadn't told him about any of this. I wasn't sure when I would. Frank also helped me set up a standalone account at a different institution entirely, just for my travel and personal expenses. One my daughter had never heard of and never would. I rebooked the flight to Tampa on my way home. 3 days later, my son-in-law knocked on my bedroom door. He came in with the careful posture of a man delivering news he's been rehearsing. He sat down in the chair by the window, Beverly's reading chair, which he'd moved without asking after they arrived, and looked at me with the expression he reserves for what he considers serious conversations. "Harold," he said, "Melissa is upset. I imagine she is. She feels like you're punishing her." I thought about that for a moment. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm making decisions about my own life. Those are different things. The bank changes. The lawyer. She found out about the lawyer. That's between me and my attorney." He leaned forward. "We've been here for 2 years taking care of this house, of you." "I didn't ask you to take care of me," I said. "I asked if you wanted to rent a room while you saved up. That was the original arrangement. Do you remember that conversation?" His face went carefully neutral. "Because I remember it very clearly," I said. "We sat at the kitchen table. You said 6 months. That was 2 years ago, and in that time the arrangement has changed considerably, and no one asked me how I felt about that either." He stood up. "That's not fair. I noticed my daughter had used the exact same phrase 2 days earlier." "Maybe not," I said. "But neither is canceling a grown man's travel plans and calling his bank to see what he's doing with his own money." He left without answering. I heard him and my daughter talking in low voices down the hall for a long time after. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry, exactly. What I felt was something more like clarity, the kind that comes when you finally said out loud what you've been thinking in private for so long that you'd started to believe it wasn't real. My grandson stopped by my room that evening. He knocked twice, which he always did. He sat on the edge of the desk and said, "Grandpa, things seem weird right now." "They are a little," I said. "Mom's upset." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did something happen?" "A lot of small things," I said. "Over a long time. You don't need the details." He nodded. He had Beverly's eyes, I noticed again. That particular shade of brown that looked darker in certain light and made it seem like he was always slightly surprised by something. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm better than I've been in a while," I said. Honestly, he seemed to believe me, which was good, because it was true. He didn't push further. He just said, "I'm around if you need anything." and left with the matter-of-fact kindness of someone who's learned care isn't complicated if you mean it. I flew to Tampa on a Tuesday. My friend met me at the airport holding a sign that said, "Old Man Watkins" in block letters, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like a long time. We drove with the windows down to a waterfront place, where we ate grouper sandwiches and drank beer and talked for 4 hours without once running out of things to say. He had aged the way old soldiers do, harder in some places, easier in others. He'd been through his own version of what I was going through, a different shape of it but the same material, and he listened to everything I told him with the patience of someone who already knows the ending, but understands that the journey to it matters. "You know what the hardest part is?" he said, at some point during the second day, the two of us sitting on his back porch watching pelicans drift over the water. "Tell me," I said, not being angry. "Anger's easy. Anyone can do angry. The hard part is just getting quiet about it, just deciding you're done." He took a drink. "Sounds like you got there." "I think I did," I said. "Beverly would be proud," he said. "She used to tell me you were too easy on people." "She told me that too," I said. I thought about Beverly the whole 3 days, in ways I hadn't allowed myself to in a while. Not the end of her life, not the hospital smell and the weight she lost and the way her hands felt in mine during those last weeks. I'd thought about that more than enough. I thought about the beginning of her. The young woman I'd met at a dance organized by the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, who'd told me my Thai was terrible and then given me her number anyway. The woman who'd built a home with me, board by board, argument by argument. She'd been my best decision, and I'd had the sense to know it at the time, which felt like a minor miracle. I talked to her out loud one night, sitting on the hotel balcony with a glass of bourbon and the sound of the Gulf below. "I should have done this sooner," I said. Not accusation, just acknowledgement. Beverly had a way of letting me figure things out at my own pace, while communicating clearly with her eyebrows that my pace was perhaps not optimal. "I know, but I'm doing it now." The Gulf didn't answer, but I felt better for saying it. When I came home, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed, my daughter's things were still everywhere. My son-in-law's truck still in the driveway, but because I had changed. I came back into it as the owner, not the occupant. There's a difference, and I felt it immediately. My daughter met me at the door. She looked like she'd been rehearsing. She said, "We need to have a real conversation." I set my bag down and said, "Make some coffee then. I'll be right back." I went upstairs, washed my face, changed my shirt, took my time. When I came down, she was at the kitchen table with 2 mugs, and the expression of someone who believes that if they choose the right words carefully enough, they can walk something back. "I know I overstepped," she said. "With the flight." "You did," I said. "I worry about you. After Mom, your mother dying didn't make me a child," I said. "It made me a widower. Those are very different things." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I don't think of you as, you canceled my flight," I said simply. "You have been making decisions about my schedule, my mail, my money, my health, for 2 years without asking. And when I asked you once why you moved my chair from the study, your mother's chair, the one she read in, you said it was in the way." "Of what?" "You didn't say." I looked at her. "I'm not angry, but I'm done pretending none of that happened." Her eyes filled. "I thought I was helping." "I know you did," I said. "That's the saddest part." She looked down. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "you and Ray start looking at places to rent. I'll give you 90 days, because I'm not unreasonable, and because I still love you. But this arrangement has run its course." She started to speak. I raised one hand, not harshly, just enough. "I've already spoken to Frank. The house is protected. The trust has been revised. I'm telling you this not to punish you, but because you deserve the truth, and because maybe knowing it will prompt some reflection that would be useful for both of us. I am not a safety net. I'm not a resource. I'm your father." Which should have been enough to begin with, she cried then. I sat with her, because she's still my daughter, and because I remember when she was small and the world was a thing she ran to me to explain. I didn't comfort her in the way she wanted, the capitulating kind, the kind that would have undone everything, but I was present. I handed her a paper towel because neither of us had thought to keep tissues in this kitchen since Beverly died, and we sat in the truth of things for a while. My son-in-law didn't come to the table that day. He knew better. I think. Or maybe he was too practical a man to walk into something he already knew he'd lose. The weeks that followed were quieter. My daughter and I moved around each other with the careful courtesy of two people renegotiating something they had no map for. My grandson came by twice to help me in the shop. The first time he held pieces steady while I worked, asking questions without the agenda that adults pack into questions. The second time he showed up with 2 sandwiches and sat on the stool his grandmother used to use and said, "Grandpa, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead," I said. "Did you know this was coming? Like, did you feel it building up?" I thought about it honestly. "I think I felt it for a long time," I said. "I just kept hoping it would sort itself out." He nodded slowly, the way people do when an answer confirms something they already suspected. "What changed?" he asked. "The flight," I said. "It was such a small thing, but it was mine, and they took it without asking." And I realized I paused, looking for the right words. I realized that a person can let so many things go that eventually they look up and there's nothing left of themselves to find. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry they did that to you." "Don't be sorry," I said. "Just remember it. When you're older and someone starts making decisions in your name with their own interests at heart, remember that it doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like help." He nodded again. He had the good quality of accepting hard things without trying to soften them into something easier. I gave him the letter on a Sunday evening, the one I'd written and rewritten 3 times over 2 weeks. Not to his parents. To him. I told him I'd revised the trust. I told him what that meant and why. I told him that I'd chosen him not because of who his parents were, but because of who he was. The boy who asked real questions and sat with the answers and didn't need anything from me but the time. He read it, standing in the hallway, still in his jacket. His face did a few things while he read. When he finished, he folded it carefully and put it in his inside pocket. He said, "This is a lot, Grandpa." "I know," I said. "You don't have to say anything." He hugged me, not the performative hug of someone fulfilling a social obligation, but the real kind. The kind that means something has passed between 2 people and both of them know it. My daughter and my son-in-law moved out 6 weeks later. They found a townhouse 20 minutes away. The goodbye was civil, careful, tinged with the particular sadness of things that had gone wrong without anyone declaring war. My daughter hugged me at the door and I hugged her back. I told her I loved her, because I do. Love and accountability are not mutually exclusive, even when it feels that way. The house was mine again. Fully, completely, quieter than it had been in 2 years, but not empty, because there's a difference between empty and still, and I was only just beginning to learn it. I went to the shop that first night and worked until almost midnight. The walnut piece had become a small side table, low and clean-lined, with joinery I was proud of. I put it in the bedroom next to Beverly's reading chair, which I'd moved back to the corner where it belonged. I put a book on it, and a lamp, and I sat in the chair and read for an hour. The next morning I called my old friend to tell him how things had settled. "Good man," he said. "How do you feel?" I looked around at the kitchen, my kitchen, with the coffee maker Beverly picked out and the window that always stuck until I fixed it last spring, and the scuff on the baseboard, where we'd moved the refrigerator in 1998. "Like I came home," I said. "Not to the house, to myself." He laughed. "That's the one, Harold. That's the one." I made breakfast after we hung up. Eggs, toast, the good coffee I'd started buying again instead of the store brand my daughter always substituted. I ate at the kitchen table in the morning light with the radio on low and no schedule. No one else's anxiety in the air. No politely weighted silences. And I thought about everything I still had time to do. More months in Tampa. The table in the shop that was really just the beginning of a set. A road trip I'd been planning in the back of my head since Beverly died. Up through the Smoky Mountains and into Tennessee. No agenda. Just moving. My grandson starting college in the fall and needing someone to talk to. I wasn't finished. I'd spent 2 years fading into the wallpaper of other people's plans, and I'd finally remembered that I had my own. I am 73 years old. I have two good hands, a paid-off house, and a friend who holds signs at airports. I have a grandson who asks real questions. I have a workbench full of projects I haven't started yet, and a road I haven't driven, and mornings that belong entirely to me. I know there are other people out there in smaller and smaller rooms, slowly handing pieces of their lives to people who've learned to take without asking. People who believe that love means erasing yourself down to something useful. People sitting in the quiet, waiting for permission that will never come. You don't need permission. Not from your children. Not from anyone. You've earned the space you occupy. Don't let anyone rearrange it without your say. If any of this reached something in you, some quiet place you've been protecting, then let somebody else know they're not alone. Leave a comment. Share the story, because you'd be surprised how many of us are out here, still standing, just finally learning to say so.